Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for today's conversation on holistic care for aging loved ones. I'm Holly Mazzocca, President of Bartlett Wealth Management, and it's my honor to guide us through today's conversation. Many of us may find ourselves in the role of caregiver as our loved ones age, as they face a diagnosis, or enter into a new phase of life. In fact, for someone turning age 65 today, they have almost a 70% chance of needing some type of long-term care in the future. At Bartlett, our experience with clients would echo this statistic. In a recent client survey, the top concern our clients shared was how to handle the rising healthcare costs of long-term care. This was followed closely by caring for a spouse as they age. Our clients have spoken, we've listened, and we brought together this great group today to share more about a topic that we know you're very interested to learn more about. Each of our guests today provides a unique perspective, ranging from the financial and the legal to the well-being of the caregiver. Their experiences, best practices, and action steps are sure to help you build a roadmap for customizing your own Aging Well plan. As with any plan, the real work starts when it's time to take action. That's when I call the folks we're joined by here today. Today, we will speak with Melissa Mabley Martin, CFP, a wealth advisor with Bartlett Wealth Management, Mark Reckman, attorney and elder care specialist with Wood and Lamping, Teresa Youngstrom, memory care specialist and founder of A Better Approach to Memory Care, Jennifer Wessel, Executive Director and Senior Living Services Specialist with Confident Living, which is a part of the Life Enriching Communities, and Emily Kendall, CEO of Industrious Marketing and a current caregiver. I know our panelists have oodles of information that they're ready to share with us, so we're going to jump right in. But first, a few quick housekeeping items. First, you should have received an email from us this morning with a resources document, which you can use to follow along to today's conversation. You'll also see that it has all of the contact information for today's panelists, along with links to learn more from each of them. We'll also have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of today's conversation, so we encourage you to submit your questions through the Q&A button on your Zoom screen. So with that, let's kick it off. I'm going to start first with Melissa. Melissa, thanks for joining us today. And I know as your specialty is really on the financial planning side of this work. We say all the time at Bartlett that a strong financial plan is a great starting point for ensuring an overall aging well plan is in place. What advice do you have for clients who come to you with questions about planning for this next stage of life?
Sure, Holly, thanks. So when we are working with clients, and this is all clients, regardless of age, we generally start with the financial plan. It's the foundational document that we use to determine asset allocation and other things as well. But we are very focused on revisiting that document annually for clients. And as they approach retirement, as they start to think about how they would like to spend their later years, we're able to run various scenarios for them because it can vary, and we'll hear more about that later. Are you going to age? We call it aging in place. Are you going to try to stay in your home? Well, that there are costs associated with that. Do you have long-term care insurance? Are there things that will come into play if you did need care? And we can run a scenario for that. We can show you what costs will look like if one or both of you were to need care for however many years. But that document provides a lot of comfort for people to see, okay, how would I, if this was something that I needed, how would I fund it? Where would that come from? If I have a spouse, what will happen to them? Will they be able to afford to stay? And so we really find that clients get a lot of peace of mind from that document. We also create a list of action items. oftentimes in a relationship, one spouse will be sort of the money person, if you will, and they know where everything is and they know how it's all being managed. And the other spouse, if they were to be, put in charge of that or left behind, they need that same list of contacts. They need all of that same information. And so we're able to make sure that they both have that list. And then we revisit those action items annually. Here's what we said we were going to do this year. Here's what we said we were going to tackle. Did we do it? What are our next steps? And so we really try to be a partner with clients in that.
So as clients are working through these financial plans, what are those checklist items that you say you really need to make sure this is covered first and foremost, or these are the conversations you definitely need to have to make sure you're set up for success should something happen?
Yeah, so Mark will get into more detail later, but there's a basic set of documents that we recommend that all clients have, estate planning documents, things like a durable power of attorney for healthcare and property and so on. And we want to make sure that you have those documents, people know where they're located, people know who is the person who is going to be acting on your behalf if you were to need it. Sometimes people are not aware that they were chosen for that role. So we want to make sure that everything is sort of in place in advance, because it's really helpful for the people who will be caring for you or working on your behalf to be very, very clear about your wishes and what you would like. We try to revisit annually things like beneficiaries on your IRAs and on your accounts to make sure that those are still in keeping with your wishes. Has there been a death or a divorce or a change in circumstance that would warrant a change there? Because, and again, Mark can speak more to this. That's a really important, it's a critical piece of your overall financial plan to make sure that the way that things read is actually how you would intend for things to happen. Oftentimes people will create those documents and put them in a drawer and then never revisit, and circumstances change a lot.
That's a really great point, that the plan is one thing, having that estate plan, having that care plan in place is one thing, but if you're not communicating it to your set of trusted advisors and also to your family members, doesn't do us a whole lot of good. I know that sometimes those conversations can be the most difficult ones to have, but any tips on communicating with those you love or with trusted advisors on how this should unfold over time?
Sure. So in our role as wealth advisors, we generally act as kind of a quarterback, if you will. And so we're trying to coordinate the accountant and the attorney, and we're trying to get to know that next generation so that we make sure that everybody's on the same page, so that if something were to happen, we can be helpful. We kind of know who to call. Generally, the spouse will know, but often children don't. And so we have a list of trusted contacts that we provide to clients that they can provide to family members to let them know, here are my people and here are their phone numbers. Here's how to reach them, if you need to, if something were to happen.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. So Mark, jumping over to you, and Melissa mentioned this idea of the documents. It's important to have them in place. So give our listeners an idea of what are those things that are just a must-have? Everyone should have them in place. Mute, Mark. Oh, Mark, the mute button.
Thank you. Yes, I thought I unmuted already. There are some basic documents in place that, and the list is rather short and simple. At the top of my list is the durable power of attorney for financial affairs. This is a revocable document. With it, you appoint someone you trust to act on your behalf on all legal and financial affairs. People appoint their spouse, they appoint one of their adult children, or maybe a responsible sibling. Some tips along those lines. My suggestion is that you appoint someone with good organizational skills. You appoint a backup. You refresh that document every 4 or 5 years. I had a client on the phone yesterday who had a power of attorney from 2008. wanted to know why it wasn't any good. Well, the answer is the law says it's good, but the bank doesn't necessarily agree with you. The insurance companies, the financial institutions, they want something much more recent. So we had to go back and redo the power of attorney, even though there were no changes in the document. And for those of you who like being proactive, I recommend that you file your power of attorney with your bank or with your money manager or with your insurance company before you need it, so that it's already in place. And remember this document's got to be filed, got to be executed before you get sick, before the stroke or the dementia sets in, because once that's happened, it's too late. Next item on my list is the living will and the power of attorney for healthcare. These are documents that do the same thing with respect to medical decisions. You know, it's important to communicate and tell people how you wish, but talking's not enough. It's a good start, but it's not enough. You really need to put that in writing so that we know who is in charge of your care, and that needs to be revisited. I had a family just 2 weekends ago that had a power of attorney for healthcare and a living will in place for years. The son that they had appointed to that position has been transferred by his job to Charlotte. And as it turned out, the local daughter became more intimately involved in going to the doctor appointments and visiting the house, and was actually more involved in their daily lives than the son even before he left. So we updated that by flipping the names so that the daughter was the primary agent. The next item on my list is the last will and testament. And this is also a revocable document. And what it does is it does two important things. A third, if you are a young parent. Number one, it says who gets your money. Number two, it says who's in charge of settling your final affairs. And three, if you're a young parent, it also says who you want to raise your children after you're gone. Last but not least is the trust agreement. This is really a fancy will. It works faster and cheaper than a will because it avoids probate. This is common for larger estates, or how shall I say, more complicated situations. What I mean by complicated situations is children with disabilities or blended families. And for those of you who have a vacation property outside of the county where you live, a trust is an important way to minimize the time and expense it'll take to settle your affairs. And I was particularly delighted to hear Melissa talk about communication, because everybody in the family and the household needs to know where these documents are. And certainly in most families, there is an allocation of duties that some people gravitate to the legal and financial, other people gravitate to other household duties. And I say this lightly, but actually it's a metaphor for what my point is. If my wife goes first, I hope she leaves me her recipe box. I want to know where her recipes are because she's a great cook. Now I'm being silly, but the point is, you've got to let your partner know where things are kept so that they can pick up the loose ends.
Mark, that's a really interesting point you make on communication and the roles individuals play in a family. Can you speak a little bit more about experiences where, you know, maybe one person is better suited for caregiving in one sense versus another sense, and that's okay to sort of divide and conquer amongst family members?
Well, this becomes particularly tricky, Holly, in families where you've got 2 or 3 kids and they don't all share the same skills. And what I've learned is that there are people who are good at the legal and financial stuff, that suits their nature. There are other people who are good at the hand-holding or the personal management, it suits their nature, and those are not necessarily interchangeable. So what I tell people all the time, try to align the skills with the person who's appropriate to have them, and be sure to understand that there may be someone in the family who struggles so much with caregiving for all the right reasons that it's not in their nature. And if so, then don't ask them and to do that, and don't feel like they're not doing their share. Find something that they can do that suits their nature, that gives them a way that they can contribute because they want to. It's just, you know, in some families, facing the final months of life is emotionally so challenging, they just can't do it. And they retreat in many ways. It looks scary. It looks like they're running off. It's not that simple. They're dealing with their own demons.
I know one of the things historically that was pretty commonplace was just the eldest son or the eldest daughter was listed as the executor. It sounds to me like you're saying there's probably some more nuance there, that we really need to look at the skills folks are best suited for. Where do in-laws fit into this? I've also seen some people say, well, it's really my son's wife who is incredibly helpful. How do you work in-laws into a care?
Absolutely. And that's a very good point. I did an estate plan. I'm working on one right now, for example, with a family that has two daughters. One's a paralegal, and one's a nurse. So that was a pretty easy decision. We did not go by birth order. The financial and legal power of attorney and the executor's job falls to the paralegal. The living will and the power of attorney for healthcare falls to the nurse. It fit very nicely. But as your point's well taken, sometimes that's an in-law. And so these documents are your opportunity to make those kind of distinctions, because if you don't, the kids will be confused about who's supposed to step in, and that can create some tension.
Mark, we had a question come in about the power of attorney. Does the power of attorney need to reside in the state where you live?
No. Now, years ago, it was required in Ohio that if you were the executor of an estate, you had to be an Ohio resident. That's changed. Years ago, it was required that if you were to be a guardian of someone's person, you had to be an Ohio resident. Those things have loosened up. Power of attorney can come from anywhere. And in this day and age, what I mean by that is modern technology. Handling legal and financial affairs remotely is not such a problem anymore. Having said that, it certainly is convenient to be here.
Good. Well, we have another question on guardianship, but I'm going to come back to that one in a little bit, because I think that Jennifer and Teresa will have some insights to share around that as well. So Jennifer, let's jump down to you. Mark and Melissa have talked a lot about communication so far and the importance of that communication. What role have you seen in communication playing in your experience within Confident Living? Where does this really come to life for you?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. And when you look at planning for your future and a lot of the insights that Mark and Melissa have said, it's really about picking the right people and picking the right program that's going to help you age successfully. As a society, we're really good at planning for things, and we take care of our, personal items by buying insurance for our cars and our boats and our houses, and we plan for our weddings, we plan for college tuition for our children. But what we leave up to chance a lot is planning to age successfully. And so with Confident Living, we are a continuing care at home program. That might be a new term for a lot of you watching this, but basically what it is it's putting an advocate in place to help you age well. And we do that through prevention and through advocacy, and of course, navigating the complicated healthcare system that we live in. Mark referenced a family where they had someone who was, medically based and financially based, but we have families come to us that they're all engineering based. And so it's really saying, how do I find those other resources available to help us age well and kind of avoid catastrophes and things in the future?
How does compromise work into this plan? I know everyone, especially in a post-COVID world, I've had a lot of folks tell me, I'm going to live at home. It's what I'm going to do. End of story. Where does compromise or having a plan B come into play?
Sure. Well, I think Ben Franklin said it best, that if you fail to plan, you have a plan to fail. So if you take the time and put together and answer questions for yourself as to, how am I going to live my life? What do I want to do? What are the things that I want to do? And then empower yourself to stay in charge of your own future. And that's where programs like ours come alongside our members, and we are their advocate to help them make good decisions as they age. There are a lot of great families out there that are very supportive of each other and helping people to make decisions, but there's also some family dynamics that get tricky. And so as an older adult, the more you put in place, the more decisions you make while you feel good, healthy, and well, the better off you're going to be down the road should something happen. I know, Holly, you mentioned the statistic earlier, which we talk about all that time, is that people over the age of 65 have a 70% chance of needing some type of long-term care services. That's a high percentage. And the other percentage we talk a lot about is the rate of aging. The rate of aging is 100%. None of us are getting out of this, right? So kudos to those of you watching this video to get you ahead in planning for aging, because the reality is that we're all going to be facing it at some point in our lives. So finding that compromise, setting up your own plans, and then sharing that information. I know that was mentioned earlier. Don't just keep that bottled up. Share that with your family and friends so that they know how they can help you if that's what was going to work best for you and your family and friends.
So you have the plan in place. And then let's say something happens and you need a little bit more care. What does that transition look like? Help us map out the continuum of what resources are there when maybe you are living independently in your home. What resources are there at the next stage, or when you need to, perhaps there's a community option that's a good fit for you. Walk us through what that continuum can look like for someone.
Sure. I think a lot of it goes back to what the need is, right? There are a lot of situations where you can hire services within your home. We all recognize that the labor market is tough right now, so that's challenging in some instances. I'm sure Teresa will share some information about that. But really, when you start to look at services, it's all about working with your medical professionals and the advocates that you have asked to help you make those decisions and the services that you'll need. For some folks, the best thing is to stay in their own home because it's comfortable. Services can come in and out easily. They could have family come in and help them. Mark referenced a family where the daughter or daughter-in-law was helping, and you had mentioned that, Holly, too. If you have those resources, coordinating all of those, but then also looking to community-based programs in senior living communities. There's a lot of resources available there, and sometimes that's the best move for people, is to move out of their home and into a community where socialization is more prevalent. They have more activities right there, right outside their door, and helping them to keep engaged and social. The socialization piece is huge when you think about aging well. And a lot of people can do it successfully in their own homes. And then a lot of people appreciate being more in a community to have all that there. So as you look at that continuum, the best thing I can recommend is to have those tough conversations today and saying, you know, if something happened to me, if I needed services, am I comfortable having someone come into my home, or does it make more sense for me to look at a place where I can receive those services? What does that look like? And making those decisions ahead of time. I actually met with a couple and I asked the question, I said, you know, if you should need care, you know, how are you going to pay for it? Number one, would you guys help with that? But then who is going to provide those services for you? And I had a husband gently touch his wife's arm and say, oh, I know you're going to help me. And she kind of looked at him like he had 7 heads, and they had never had that conversation. And so I said, I'm sure you're going to have an interesting dinner conversation tonight. But it was good for them because he just assumed that she would be able to do it. And her reality was that her hip wasn't as strong as it used to be. And the thought of having to lift him, and she knew a lot because she was a registered nurse. And so they came back to me and said they had some good conversations on saying, okay, what is realistic? How are we going to be able to do this? And what does that services look like for us within our home? Or what are some signs, or what are some things that are going to tell us that it's time to downsize or declutter more, or to make that transition so that we're in a safe setting? And safety is really key.
What are just a few tips, a few low-hanging fruit that, you know, people should really look for to make sure that their loved ones are safe? I know that the statistics around falls and accidents in the home are really scary. We want to make sure everyone's able to age in a really graceful way.
Right. So some tips are, the first is that you evaluate your own home and kind of do an overview and saying, is my house safe? What are some things that I can declutter? What are some things that I can get rid of? There's lots of great decluttering resources out there, like as simple as starting in your kitchen and getting rid of 1 spatula because you have 7, you know, like start getting getting rid of some of those things. The other thing that's a really great suggestion, and we do this for our members, is we send out an advocate to their home to do that evaluation with a set of fresh eyes, and really having someone that's not in your family look at your home to make those recommendations, because that whole sentimental piece goes away. You know, when you have someone that's doesn't really understand that was from grandma, that was a piece that was passed down, or things like that, and making those recommendations. And so really having a professional come in, look at the home from a function standpoint, from a decluttering standpoint, and from a long-term basis. What are some things that you can do today, such as putting in grab bars or an extra railing or things like that, so that you can age in place successfully? By doing those things, and that's what we help our members with, is doing those things ahead of time. It's kind of, when things and if things happen down in the future, they don't worry as much because they've already taken care of kind of those what ifs. So that would be my best thing, is to start with a fresh set of clean eyes, and then to get someone that's not part of your family to do that same evaluation and give you some tips, who's a professional for aging in place.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Teresa, I know one of the things we talked about is Jennifer said, have someone from the family. Sometimes it's hard to separate those two things. So one of the things I know we talked about is that role of caregiver and how it can be really difficult to be both caregiver and insert other relationship here, whether it's spouse or daughter. What are some tips that you have for folks as they're building that care team and thinking about how to maintain strong relationships over time?
Sure. So when dementia is involved, or when we're just thinking there might be symptoms of dementia, I had a wife come to me saying, "Gosh, Joe's just not, he's doing this and doing that, but he was also 88 years old." So, to have her make a journal and see, do we really have something going on, or we not have something going on? People that get dementia, some of them are aware they're having challenges and some are not aware they're having challenges, and it can really be sensitive. And as we've talked about in the past, that person that's closest to them, boy, if you've got someone who's paranoid and suspicious about being accused of making mistakes, then the target is really on that person that's closest to them, and the filters can really be out. And so it's so good to build a team. And I love what Jennifer said about trying to stay in your own home. That is ideal. If you haven't checked out our program, be sure and do that. But just building that team around you of what your plan B is going to be. But yeah, just being able to separate out your resources, because I have had families where there's no living relatives, and that makes it very difficult. Or sometimes there's family of 10, and to figure out how to get them to help, and not everybody going in the same direction.
Yeah. So really dividing up that care plan. It's not as sometimes probably as technical as what Mark's saying, have these documents in place, but it's more about a family understanding and building out who comes when and who's responsible for what. Because it's like the old saying, too many cooks in the kitchen doesn't always make the best meal, right?
Definitely, because if we all don't agree, people who are less, who aren't around the patient or the resident as much, that resident with dementia can sometimes use a part of their brain where they're more cordial with them. And they're like, "I'm fine, it's so good." And, but if you're the one that's there every day, you see all the stuff that's going on. And so, but you're going to need help. I tell people the first time I sit down that, what, eventually you're going to bring help in, or you're going to go somewhere and get help. That's just what happens to all of us. And I plant that seed right then. You either are going to bring help in, or we're going to have to go somewhere, and start thinking about what your plan B is going to be.
So thinking about the caregiver, I know some of the statistics around the impact on caregivers are pretty daunting. What can families do to make sure that they're prepared for the role of caregiver? What resources are available for them?
Yeah, so it's so important to notice if you've got a family where there's one daughter and she thinks she's going to do it all, and she takes care of the grandchildren 3 days a week, and she has mom living with her, and she's going to do all of this. And the statistics are not good at all, because we find that 65% of those primary caregivers will get sick and die first. I mean, it's just so stressful, and they pull in from their normal social events. They stop attending wherever their place of worship was, and they stop meeting with friends and getting time off. And so they get sick. And so it's just so important to early on start adding people to your team and get help.
I was speaking with a family friend of ours whose mother lived with her for a long time, and she was in that exact position that you described. And she's a registered nurse. So it was obvious, mom's going to move in with our family, but she still had children at home. She still had grandkids who would pop in from time to time, and she was caring for her mom. So definitely sandwiched in there. And she provided this great tip. She said, I had a list of about 10 people, and I gave myself permission to ask for help. I didn't have to be the martyr. I knew that people wanted to help me, wanted to help mom. And so I just would start at the top of the list and tick my way down. And that was the way that I could ensure that mom could stay with us longer, was because she was willing to kind of ask for that help. So is there a sense, Teresa, that you see with caregivers where it's almost like they almost need permission to lessen that burden and recognize that it's good for everyone. They need to fill up their own cups.
Yeah, for some of us, that would just, well, of course, we're going to ask people to help us. Of course, there's resources. But for some, they do think that, well, I guess I should be the one to do this. I mean, I am the oldest daughter, and I am the nurse in the family. And so I usually tell them, think about the people that live around you. They might come over and help. They might sit with her, and do a puzzle while you can run to the grocery store or go get your nails done or go get your hair done, and get time off. I help them create a calendar when different siblings are going to stop by. We don't always tell the resident that that's what we're doing. We just create this so we have more hands and eyes on to come in and make sure we're helping. But really, you've got neighbors, you've got people that you've known for a long time. You've got distant family members, cousins, aunts, and uncles who might be able to come in and help. But they can be afraid because they're not used to working with someone like this. They'll send dinner, but to come in and sit with them. So to be able to educate them that, there are a lot of great things a lot of great time we spend with these folks. Getting a diagnosis with dementia, it's not like, a pancreatic cancer where, you're going to be gone in 3 months. This is 5, 10, 15, 20. They're saying vascular dementia is lasting 30 years. So we got to have a plan, Holly, because it's a journey, and you definitely need a plan and you need a team.
What resources? I know a lot of folks, and Teresa and Jennifer, you both reference this, that it's expensive. I know Melissa and Mark see this in their work too, when we're running financial plans, that we're building in some very expensive costs. What resources are available to family members that are a part of maybe normal healthcare that we just don't think about to turn to, or maybe it's a part of a community program that people should kind of keep on their radar screen and be more aware of to be able to tap into?
Sure. There are more and more resources all the time. I mean, we have Council on Aging, we have the Alzheimer's Association, but communities usually have support groups that you can plug into. We now have geriatric care managers in the community where you might pay that person when you need them to come by and help you. You need to get some help to do this. So
good. Any tips, Teresa? Just little, I know in the past you've shared with me some really great, like just little tips and tricks that you say, like, these are just things to be really aware of, as especially with, a loved one who is demonstrating signs of dementia, whether it is diagnosed or not. Here's just some easy tips to make those interactions positive versus combative.
Yeah, definitely want to always approach from front, because what we don't realize is they tend to lose peripheral vision and their world is in here. And so to always approach them from the front, we don't want to startle anybody and get their defense mechanism or limbic system triggered. Boy, that can get them really upset. And it's very hard to work with them at that point. And so to maybe leave your problems outdoor, maybe take a breath and get it all together and leave your problems outdoor. Notify your face you're happy to be there. Mayo Clinic says our body language and our tone speaks more loudly than our words. And think about that. Are you coming in with, oh my gosh, are you wet again? And why didn't you look at this mess? Or, I mean, okay, that's going to get you in trouble right away. But if you came in with, hey, Holly, so great to see you today. Yeah, looking great. I love that necklace. You know what? You should wear it all the time. I love it. And get a smile on their face right away. I don't have to come in and say, oh boy, we've got to shower today and get those toenails done. That's not a good way to start this. I should be coming in with a compliment, and it's about relationship. And if I'm forever finger wagging you down and correcting you, we damage the relationship, and you may get to the point where you don't listen to me or even want me around anymore. So it's so important that we take care of the relationship first. We come in, we're joining them on the journey wherever they are. So have an awareness. When you first come in, are they back in time? Are they talking about their parents? Or are they maybe mad about something? They got a good mad going on. You need to validate right away and get on their team. Well, that shouldn't have happened. As humans, we want to correct them first, sadly. We want to say, no, that didn't happen. You've been sitting there all day. That didn't happen. Oh my, it's so much better to get on their team and validate their position, de-escalate some of the energy, and then move them to a different place emotionally or physically where, you know what, we should go get a glass of iced tea and rest. That had to be exhausting, what you've been through. And how can you join them on the journey in that way to maintain great relationship?
That's great. I think all the time that I need to take some of those as parenting tips too. I have little kids at home, and I think I come home from work and I just start with the finger wagging. That's not probably the best way to enter my home. So.
A lot of what I teach works well for parents and for children with autism, honestly.
That's a really great point. Emily, thank you, Teresa, for some of those tips and just the action items and knowing which resources are available to folks. So Emily, you and I have discussed the very unique role that you play as a caregiver in your own family's journey. And Emily and I had the honor of connecting after she spoke at a recent women's event. And she just shared a very powerful story about her own experience. Can you share a little bit about your path from the family perspective? So from the sort of inside baseball perspective that you and your family are navigating.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Holly. Thank you for having me here. Let me get my AirPod back in. Are you able to hear me okay? Great. Thank you for having me. Yes, I can cover all of the bases here today. My mom was diagnosed at 62 years old with Parkinson's, which has really manifested itself as Parkinson's with dementia. And Parkinson's can manifest itself in many different ways. She was diagnosed the March before my oldest daughter was born. And she started to decline pretty rapidly in the last 2 years. So for our family, I have a younger sister who's also here in Cincinnati. And then I have 3 children of my own, and my dad and my mom. We decided that after her diagnosis, a year after her diagnosis, my dad made the executive decision to move to a single-story home in the same neighborhood. So it's familiar for my mom, but that made a big difference because part of our care plan that we didn't necessarily think through as well as the financial and estate planning was to have my mom remain at home. Now, what challenged that was my mom, in the height of COVID, fell and split her patella. And then 24 hours later, fell and broke her hip. So we were facing 2 surgeries within 48 hours. And then that really changed the landscape of the type of care that we needed to provide for her. So one of the things that we put together as a family, we reached out to hospice, which provides palliative care and respite care, because Teresa hit on some great points, and so did Jennifer, about preparing your home and then also taking care of the caregiver. A lot of this navigating falls to my dad, and we have a team of caregivers that's with my mom from 8 in the morning until 8 o'clock at night, because we decided that the best thing as a family was to have her be at home. Now we're to the point where we probably need to start revisiting that care plan. But I will say something that really helped us along the way is having all of the tactical financials, power of attorney, estate, all of that tactical stuff that needs to be taken care of. That was done well ahead of time. I have to commend my parents for putting all of that in place ahead of time, because this gets really emotional really fast, and not having to worry about dealing with money or finances or who's going to do what while you're in the thick of navigating, back-to-back surgeries and things that come up is really helpful.
Great. So as you think about the family dynamic, the dynamic you're living through right now, what have been some tips that have really helped you all, stick together and navigate what's best for your mom's care?
That's a great question, Holly. So my mom comes from a big family. So her siblings have also weighed in and wanted to be involved, which is wonderful. But again, to that point about cooks in the kitchen that you made earlier, something that's been important, again, I will go back to having the tactical plan in place has really eliminated some of the potential hotspots for argument that could come up, which has been really helpful. Mm-hmm. Another thing that we've tried to remember, because again, this gets really tough and everyone processes this very differently. I try and assume good intentions and most respectful interpretation. That's a tip that I learned from a friend of mine. When you're dealing with someone, always assume that they have good intentions and assume the most respectful interpretation. What's been a challenge to navigate recently, as my mom has declined more quickly, my sister does not have children, and I have 3 children, one with special needs and a medical complexity. So and now I have a newborn baby. So my ability to help out is a lot more limited, and that can be a source of resentment on my sister's part, because I think she looks to me to help more, and I really just can't. And that's something that we've all talked about and navigated as a family, but we try and find ways to have my mom engage and involved with her grandchildren, because that's something that's been really hard. I was expecting to be able to have my mom help me, and now I'm in quite the reversed role, right, where I'm having to help my mom. We also had Teresa come in and train and work with us and my mom's caregiving team to really understand how best to work with and care for my mom, because those tips that Teresa just mentioned, and there are so much more, she's a wealth of information, really make a difference. Even things like, for example, we were doing Sunday family dinners. My mom doesn't do well, starting around 4 or 5 o'clock, she starts to decline with something called sundowners. So we switched that to family breakfast. And my mom is much better. She's much more engaged with the kids and able to participate as a family. And that's another thing that you have to think about, is how to talk to young kids about what's going on, and what they see my mom going through, because it's not always easy. And there are times where she's very confused. But we've learned some great advice from Teresa to navigate how to address all of these different things.
That's a great point on the little kids, because oftentimes there are either grandchildren or great-grandchildren, or even maybe neighbors who are close by and notice changes. How have you addressed that, especially with, your daughter's 6, and so she's starting to kind of understand these things? What are some tips that that caregivers can think about to age appropriately explain what's going on?
Great. That's a great question. I always lead with be honest as possible without being scary, right? One of the things that's hard with dementia and Parkinson's, it's not something that you can really totally see on the outside. So we've just kind of talked in very basic terms with Emma, my daughter, about, this is what Mimi is going through. These are some of the things that you'll notice. Some of the tips that Teresa, always approach Mimi from the front. And just really my best advice is be as honest as possible without getting into some of the scary details. My mom does have some scary episodes, and we do try and keep Emma from and Luke and Grace from seeing those, which is why we moved from dinner to breakfast. But we just try and be honest, and it's the same. But at the same time, being respectful that Mimi is still Mimi, and it's honestly this similar approach that we take with my son who has Down syndrome, with Emma explaining, we really, it's just part of life and part of how things are. It's not, we don't try and call too much attention to it, but we do it when it comes up and is appropriate, if that makes sense, and are honest.
Good. Thank you. I know we have a couple of questions coming in. So before we get into those, I'd love just to do a quick round robin and hear from each of you an action item. What is the one thing you want folks to really take away from today? Melissa, let's start with you.
So I think, creating a plan in concert with your trusted advisors, your spouse or partner or family is a great first step. But I would also be remiss if I didn't tell you to check your beneficiary forms, because all the good work in the world with a Mark or whoever your attorney is, those beneficiary forms will govern. So if they say something different than what your will or your trust document says, that's what will ultimately win out. So make sure that those two things line up.
Great. Mark, what about you?
It's critical to give someone that you trust the written authority to step in and manage your affairs and your health. It's an easy step. It will save you a lot of time and money.
Jennifer.
Take the time to put the plan in place and be realistic and really think about being honest with yourself and your family. And my takeaway is to start today, while you feel good, while time's on your side. And the reality is, like we said, no one's getting out of aging. So do it right, do it well, and take the time to take charge and keep empowering yourself to age successfully in place.
Teresa, a tip from you.
Yeah, so if we keep in mind that only 1 in 5 families stick together after going through this, you guys, it's so important that we remember to meet together and talk about what's going on, try and get everybody going in the same direction. Let's train people. We just don't automatically understand how dementia works. And so get some training, but remember, with the person, it's about the relationship. And it's so important that you don't come in every day with finger wagging and correcting, but that you create, so they may not have mindfulness, but they have mindlessness, and they still enjoy certain things they've always enjoyed. And can you still enjoy those things with them? But all along, guys, you don't know where this is going to go or if you're going to need help. And so you need to be working on your plan B all the time.
Emily, take us home.
Great. All right. I would say there's a wealth of resources on this call to help you put the plan in place. And to echo Jennifer, start as soon as you can. In addition to having my mom going through this situation with my family on the aging piece, I have a blended family and I have a child with special needs. So I've been through it all. And, one of the things before I got married to my husband was, we put all of that in place for us, mainly because I didn't want his ex-wife to get any of our money. So it should go to the kids. But I will say, again, like having all that taken care of as early as possible, because this gets emotional. And that way you don't have to worry about the tactical while you are navigating the emotional.
Great, thank you all. So first question here, we'll jump into, this one goes to Melissa. So Melissa, it seems like cybercrime is really on the rise. It's always out there, but it's only getting worse. And it does seem to target many of our older generations. How can we ensure that the ones we love are informed and able to kind of spot a scam, to know when there's fraudulent activity out there?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the scam artists are just getting better. They're just, and the things that will come in to your phone, to your email, seem very legit. They very often will create a sense of urgency or panic in somebody. Oh, my Amazon account has been hacked is a really common one. Oh, somebody has broken into my bank account. Simple tips like hover over a link and make sure that that link is a legit address. Bartlett actually has videos that we're going to roll out for clients about cybercrime, because it is something that is coming up more and more. And have conversations with your family members. Oftentimes when this happens to somebody, there's a lot of shame. They don't want to say anything. Oh, like they're going to think that I'm losing it if I tell them that I've fallen victim or prey to this scam. So just to make sure, again, with the communication, that communication lines are open, that people feel very comfortable, to Teresa's point, that they don't feel that finger wag or that judgment, you're going to be able to help them.
Great. I think that's so important on the cyber side, and we're just seeing more and more of it, and recognize they're hitting you from text messages. People you trust, your pastor, your priest, the principal at your school, your attorney, your financial advisor will not ask you to go do anything for them via text message. One of my other favorites is they've really come to replicate exactly how the banks or how Microsoft or Apple emails look, and they'll do their best to replicate them. So I personally never click on a link that comes in from my bank or from my online accounts or anything like that. I just go straight to the institution and use my login credentials, because then I know that it will pop up in the inbox there. Or a lot of times I'll just pick up the phone and call someone and make sure that I'm not clicking a link. It's very tempting, but it's the easiest way to fall victim to somebody. So just, if there's something that makes you say, pick up the phone, give someone a call, and we're always happy to help. There was another question that came up: at what point should one consider guardianship for their adult spouse? Maybe Mark, you want to pick up on this one, and then perhaps if anyone else has any insights on it.
Guardianship is a legal process through probate court in which the ill person is determined to be incompetent, and a guardian is appointed either for their person or their estate, or both. It's an effective way to assume authority over someone else's affairs. It ultimately strips them of the legal capacity to manage their own affairs. It works. It is a sledgehammer. It is a bit of a sledgehammer. And what I mean by that is that it is what I would consider a pretty drastic move. It's cumbersome. It's a little expensive. There are limitations placed on what you can do. For example, if you're going to assume responsibility to pay bills, those all have to be pre-approved by the probate court. Now, it works. It's a great tool. But if you have a power of attorney in place for finances and for healthcare, most families can avoid that need. Not always. And where you run into it, Holly, in particular, is where you have a family member who is acting out aggressively. So this is somebody who is agitated. They're runaways from they're in the hospital and they run away, or you have a suicide attempt, or you have perhaps real problems with this cybercrime stuff, where maybe they keep falling for tricks and tens of thousands of dollars are flying out the door. But it is almost always option of last resort, and an experienced, wise, and clever estate lawyer, elder law lawyer, can probably weave around it if you give them a chance.
Great. There's a question that came in on, are there any agencies that help families with predatory behavior regarding seniors who are battling dementia or other issues? This person says they threaten to call the Attorney General, but it's mostly an empty threat. So who should you turn to if you see something that isn't right?
Here in Ohio, we have a statute for elder abuse, and the local agency is the Adult Protective Service. So that's where I would start. It's not a perfect solution. It's a bureaucracy. They're overworked, underpaid, but it's the place to start, and you get a good investigator, you'll get a good result.
So in that case, are there similar agencies to that one in other states then, sort of across the country?
Yeah, I think that there are adult protective statutes in many of the states now. And in Ohio, that's run by the prosecutor's office locally. And also for people who are institutionalized, there's an ombudsman program that's been in place for decades now. And in this area, that's managed by Pro Seniors, which is a nonprofit group that you can find simply by Googling Pro Seniors in Cincinnati. They have an ombudsman program, and you can speak to that person. I believe last time I looked, I think there were 2 or 3 operating in the area, 2 or 3 ombudsmans.
Okay, great. So the combination of nonprofit support plus government agencies can help us make sure that people are cared for. One last question I'll send to Teresa. Question on if you think someone may be battling dementia, but there's a lot of pushback or saying denial that's in play. Any tips for how to handle that?
What most people don't know is that half of these people don't know they're sick. And so when you want to help me, I do that myself. And so it can be very difficult. We really have to have a different type of a care plan working with that person. Getting the family on the same team is so important. Whether we can have a family meeting without the person who has dementia, whether we can do a Zoom meeting and pull people wherever they live. Sometimes the power of attorney is in another state, but we want to get everybody on the same page as to strategies on how we're going to figure this out and how we're going to serve this person and move forward with care. And so communication is so important. But to understand, do they even know that they're sick? Or do they not even know they're sick? Because the care plan is completely different on how we care for them.
Great, thank you. Well, a big thanks to all of our panelists here today. We're really grateful for your insights and your experience. We encourage you to reach out, to check out their websites, to look at the list of resources provided via email. I know all of them are happy to help. This is, it's a long journey. And I think as we heard today, starting ASAP, as Jennifer said, making sure you have the financial plan in place, that you understand the potential costs of care, making sure that all of those legal documents are in place. You putting those legal documents into action by checking your beneficiaries, making sure the accounts are in alignment, and then pulling together that caregiver team. You don't have to go it alone. There's a lot of resources, both from government agencies and from nonprofits and other local organizations, wherever you are, to help you on this journey. So from all of us here, we are grateful for your time today, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Take care.